Every day, people go to work, and very often, a major part of who we are is shaped by the kind of job we do. For a copper miner who excavates the earth, life and livelihood is dependent on the kindness of nature. And when disasters strike, the entire life of the community is at risk. September 25, 1970, the Mufulira Mine's tailing dam ruptured, releasing over 1 million tons of tailings, trapping and killing 89 people. Mufulira, land of abundance as it is often called, is situated in the Copper Belt province of Zambia. The majority of its population is involved in the mining industry. The rest of the population is doing part of trading and running smaller businesses. However, all these things wouldn't have been there had it not been for the copper mine. Mufulira is the copper mine. It is the mine that attracted people there, and it is the mine that still keeps people there.
Almost 71 years ago, I was born in that town, 1946. I lived in Mufulira, a vibrant town on the Copper Belt. Mostly it was a mining town, and virtually everything around it was concerned with mining. Although we lived in Kamchanga, which was not part of mining, but the entire town revolved around the copper mines.
Initial prospecting of Mufulira copper mine started way back in 1923, and by 1933, production had begun. The mine slowly grew to be one of the biggest copper mines, not just Africa, but in the world. As with any industrialization plant, there are a number of risks involved. Risks to the environment, but more so risks to the people that are involved in extracting this great mineral. The main risks lie with people working underground. Death can result from a number of causes, from explosives, heat, failure in ventilation, and as people were soon to find out, even mud. Copper ore is extracted from the ground with a lot of undesirable and sometimes worthless material, and so there is an extraction process that separates the ore from what we can call waste. This waste is known as tailings or slime. It consists of unwanted materials mixed in water and soil, coming together to make very rich mud. The question mine companies have to ask themselves is, where do you keep these tailings? In some cases, these are pumped underground into sections of the mine no longer in use, but in most cases, and as was the case in Mufulira, these tailings were stored above the surface in what we call tailings dams or slime dams. And more to the point of Mufulira, these tailing dams happen to be right on the top of where the miners were working underground.
In the early morning of September 25, 1970, a very terrible accident occurred. A sinkhole opened, connecting the top part, which is the slime dam, just above the shafts, and the underground workings. Men who were working below the 500 meters level stood no chance of escaping. Upon seeing what was happening, those who were on the higher level quickly ascended to the surface, and it was at this particular time that the full extent of the disaster was felt.
So what led to the disaster is that tailings dam number 3 happened to be positioned right above the shafts where operations were being undertaken. Mud and water had collected in the dam and had seeped right down to the bottom, and over time had began to gather quite a lot of pressure. This highly pressurized mud and water caused the overhanging walls in the shaft 500 meters below the surface to give way. Mud and water poured into the shaft at such high pressure that it is believed some of the miners were killed from the sheer force of the mud before they even had time to drown.
My uncle worked under the mines as a driver underground. That means that when the disaster occurred, he was actually working underground.
One of the survivors, Mr. Kavanda, shared his story. He described how he saw 9 of his mates disappear. I heard a very violent sound, and I then saw mud coming towards us. The ventilation fan went off and there was total darkness. I got so confused I didn't know what to do. I quickly remembered the ladder and I advised my workmates to run to the ladder, but they refused, and I never saw them since then.
As the tailings poured, a sinkhole was formed at the top of the dam, allowing more mud and water to continue pouring into the shaft.
In the mid-morning of September 25th, rescue operations began by rescue teams from all the mines in Copperbelt. They did all they can and they exposed themselves to extreme danger, for there was no guarantee that a further inrush of mud would not occur. The rescue teams searched in all the affected areas and at least managed to rescue 4 men. They tried all they could for 5 days, and on the 30th of September, it was announced that they couldn't go on with the searching and all the rescue operations were withdrawn. The country had to accept the Mufulira disaster as the worst of its kind. And for that particular week, it was announced that there was going to be a national mourning and all flags in the country were going to fly at half-mast.
When in 1970 there was a disaster of the worst type in the entire history of the Republic of Zambia, the copper mines, we lost many people. I personally lost my uncle, Mr. Boston Musonda. The funeral took quite some time, in the sense that although within our house we had a funeral for 3 days, but in the entire township, Kantanshi Township, which was affected, and there must have been close to 67, 70 or so funerals at every other house.
A day after the incident, General Manager of the mine, Mr. Richard Nelly, said, "It was a mining catastrophe, completely unexpected and unpredictable. If it were not, it would have been detected by mine engineers." This assertion is highly questionable. Reports suggest that 2 years prior to the disaster, sinkholes opened within number 3 tailings pond and a surface depression developed in the impoundment. There were also 2 cases of minor mud ingress into the mine a few months before the main failure. Management were reluctant to accept and investigate the potential impact of future sinkholes appearing. Measures to mitigate the effects of the disaster were swift and immediate. Consultants were flown in from across the globe, and their main task was to find ways of stopping the sinkhole from causing any further flooding before the onset of the rainy season, which was due a couple months from the time of the disaster. An inquiry was launched by then President Kaunda to investigate the causes behind the Mufulira disaster. Another measure was that a disaster relief fund was quickly put together to help the families that were aggrieved, as well as to help in the process of rehabilitating the mine.
We have eventually given some money to our auntie for the loss of the husband, but the effects continued for a very long time in Mufulira, because the fact that so many people had died at one go meant that the entire town, which depended upon the copper mines, had come to a standstill.
Zambia's mining industry have never seen a disaster of this magnitude ever before, and it is everyone's prayer that it doesn't occur again.